Kylie had been paralyzed for 10 years, but her children were always too busy living their own lives. They went on vacations, attended parties, enjoyed what they called freedom. And I stayed behind. I couldn't leave. I was the one who was with her day and night, fulfilling all her needs. In the end, she bequeathed all her properties to her biological children. To me, she left only the old, dilapidated house on Main Street in Maple Creek, Oregon. Marie's daughter, Amaya, never missed an opportunity to throw a snide remark my way. To her, I was nothing more than a simple housekeeper, someone easily overlooked, someone undeserving of recognition. Respect was a currency she never spent on me. But as I started to clean up that old house, I stumbled upon things I never expected.
That morning, sunlicht streamed through the window, casting a gentle glow on Marie's face.
Her skin seemed a little brighter than usual. Still, it took great effort for her even to speak. With a barely audible whisper, she asked if I could make her a chicken pot pie. I wiped her face, massaged her limbs, while she stared at me the whole time, as if she still had something to say, something caught between us. In the kitchen, I set to work, kneading the dough, seasoning the filling, all by feel. But when I looked back, I noticed her gaze had drifted upwards, fixed on the ceiling, motionless. When the pie had cooled a bit, I cut it into small pieces and fed it to her slowly, bite by bite. She chewed deliberately as always, and often it took her a long time to finish a meal. But today was different. Her appetite surprised me. Usually, she barely ate a few bites, but today she emptied the entire plate and even asked for some hot broth. She drank it in small sips, silently, but at 1:52 a.m., I woke up, feeling that something was wrong. Her hand was cold. In a panic, I leaned forward to check her breath, but there was nothing, only the echo of silence. I had no choice but to let go. With a broken heart, I whispered in a choked voice, "Marie, Mom." She was gone, just hours after eating her beloved chicken pot pie. At 9 a.m., Amaya burst in. As soon as she crossed the threshold, she snarled at me, "What did you do? What did you feed my mother?" For a moment, I almost lost my temper. Do you think I would have harmed her after all these years? When did you ever truly care for her? While you were enjoying your life, I was by her side for 10 years, non-stop, and now you show up just to accuse me. My voice trembled with rage, growing shriller with each word. Amaya replied coldly, "If you had no ulterior motive, why did you stay all these years?" I stood still, staring at her silently, my eyes fixed on hers. Something in my gaze must have unnerved her, for she immediately fell silent. Her husband, Archer, reached out and grabbed her arm, clearly trying to defuse the tension. He turned to me and said, "Kylie, if you have an ounce of decency, keep your mouth shut and make sure Marie gets a proper burial." After the funeral, they began to squabble over the inheritance. It was chaos, loud voices, bitter arguments, not a hint of grief in the room. They distributed several houses, each got one in the row of adjoining properties, and the remaining few $1,000s in savings were equally divided. Sometimes, the coldness of human nature cuts deeper than a winter wind. Marie had lived a hard life, raising her 3 children alone. Her husband died in an accident when he was only 41, and she struggled to feed her family on a small family farm on the outskirts, where she worked dozens of acres by herself. 10 years ago, a stroke left her paralyzed. By then, my husband, Archer, had already left us and disappeared without a trace. At that time, Amaya and her brother Dawson were still minors. As Archer's wife, I didn't hesitate. I took over the care of his mother, handled everything. When they finally grew up and started their own lives, they simply left all the responsibility to me and never looked back. Of course, I had moments of resentment. After all, she was their mother. How could they be so indifferent? Their coldness made my blood boil. I swore to carry on, if only to prove them wrong. But now, seeing them tear each other apart over money, without a single word of thanks to me after a decade of care, I felt like a complete fool. 10 years of devotion, and yet I couldn't measure up to her biological children. The bitterness burned in my chest, impossible to shake. But I didn't want to be petty or resentful, because Marie truly had a kind heart. Ever since I married Archer, Marie had treated me like her own daughter. Every time I came home, dinner was already prepared. Even the fruit was washed and neatly arranged on the kitchen counter. She was quiet, friendly, never impatient. Even when I lost my temper and yelled at her, she discreetly placed a full meal on the table, using tenderness and patience to soothe my worst moods. Her grace often surpassed my own mother's. On holidays, she would slip me some money and say, "Go buy yourself something nice." She never made me work hard. Always said, "I'll take care of it." She also never pressed me about having children. She laughed and said, "Don't be silly. Raising children isn't every woman's duty. You're still young. Enjoy life. Don't end up like me, giving everything and getting nothing back." Back then, I didn't pay much attention to her words, but now I understand. She just wanted me to live a little more peacefully. Kindness carries its own reward. As long as I can stand before my own conscience, nothing else matters. The next morning, I sat on the bed as usual, only to realize after a moment of silence that the house no longer held Marie's breath. Before I could lose myself in the quiet, there was a knock at the door. I barely had time to react when a familiar voice from outside called, "Kylie, you should think about selling the house Mom left you. I found a buyer who's offering a generous price. They want to completely renovate it. Come on, Kylie. This house is old and falling apart. It's not safe to stay here alone. Why don't you move out and take the money while you can?" It was Dawson, Marie's youngest son, who rarely made himself known. I didn't even turn to face him. "I'm not selling," I said. "Think about it. Offers like this don't come often. You'll regret it if you miss out." He didn't even finish his spiel before leaving, as if the house were his to sell. A few days later, the noise began. Heavy machinery rumbled in the house next door as they demolished Amaya's former home. The street trembled under the sound of drills and excavators tearing down what was left of the old house. It was loud, dissonant, and deeply ironic. If Marie could see this from where she was, how heartbroken would she be? The houses she had worked her whole life to leave to her children didn't outlast her death by a week. The thought of sharing a wall with strangers also made me consider moving out. But first, I wanted to thoroughly clean the place, one last time. This was the house where my husband had grown up, even if he hadn't set foot here in years. I hoped that if he ever came back, he would still recognize this small corner of his past. I started cleaning everything, room by room. Then, with a bucket of water in hand, I walked down the hall. That's when I saw it. Mud tracks on the freshly cleaned floor. I frowned. The old wooden floorboards had shifted slightly, worn by time. I knelt down, lifted one of the loose ones to check for damage, and froze.
Beneath the floor, hidden in a cavity, lay a stack of $100 bills.
My hands trembled as I lowered the board. My heart raced with disbelief. What was this? Where did this money come from? Had Marie left it? How had she saved so much money? And why had she hidden it here? I locked the door and carefully returned to the spot, opened the hiding place, and began to collect the bills, putting them into a black garbage bag. The money was neatly bundled, layer upon layer. It took 2 hours to count it all. $300,000. $300,000 in cash. As I reached out to close the floorboards, I saw a yellow envelope at the end. Inside was a small, crumpled note written in Marie's shaky handwriting. "Dear Kylie, this money is for you.
Stop waiting for Archer.
He's not worth it. Live your life, darling. I always thought of you and always wished you the best." My hands trembled as I held the note. A lump formed in my throat, and I couldn't utter a single word. In that moment, the moment I truly accepted that Marie was gone, the chain that had been taut within me for 10 long years finally snapped. I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, my cries echoing through the house like an unleashed storm. Years of frustration, pain, and loneliness poured out of me all at once, leaving nothing but a desolate silence. I don't know how long I cried. Only when my body gave out did the tears finally subside. I washed my face, looked in the mirror, and saw my swollen eyes. My gaze wandered to the black bag behind me. How had she saved so much? Her children had treated her with cold indifference for years, unaware that she had secretly left something for me. The houses they squabbled over weren't worth more than $50,000 each here. but she had left me 10 times that in cash. Then I finally understood. Marie had always seen me as the only person she could truly trust. And as I realized this, a wave of shame washed over me. All the moments of bitterness I had carried seemed so foolish now. I'd never seen so much money at once. Its weight overwhelmed me, grateful, nervous, stunned, but I pulled myself together. The first thing I needed was to deposit it into a bank account. I couldn't live with that much cash in a garbage bag, not when just the sight of it made my heart pound. That afternoon, I left the house during a quieter hour. The street was unusually still. Just in case, I divided the money in half and planned to deposit it into different banks. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, as if eyes lurked from the shadows. Yet every time I turned around, the street was empty. Only the rustle of fallen leaves carried by the wind could be heard. After making the deposits and stepping out of the bank, the sun still warmed the sidewalk. The scent of food wafted from Marlowe's eatery next door, rich and comforting. I looked at my watch. School would be out soon, and suddenly a quiet warmth spread in my chest. After Archer and I married, we had a son. Since he started school, it had been my parents who picked him up and took him home, looked after him in the afternoon. All these years, they had silently carried the burden of motherhood for me. They weren't young anymore, but they never complained. They understood the burdens I carried and never asked for anything in return. They supported me silently, steadfastly. Now that Marie was no longer here, I didn't have to be torn between housework and caregiving. Finally, I could be a mother in the truest sense of the word. I reached for the phone and dialed, "Mom, Dad, don't cook tonight. You two come with me to Marlowe's eatery. Dinner's on me." I immediately heard the shift in her voice, lighter, almost joyful. As I saw them enter the restaurant, I greeted them with a smile I hadn't given them in years. They returned the smile and came closer. Their faces radiated warmth. For a moment, it felt as if I had been transported back in time. To the days when the three of us went out like that, with full hearts and simpler days. I composed myself, not wanting them to see the turmoil within. I hugged my parents tightly, perhaps too tightly. Sawyer squirmed at my side. "Mom, you're squeezing too hard, I can't breathe." I laughed. "Come on, sit down, the food will be here soon." A wave of tenderness washed over me as I saw their familiar faces. Time slipped through our fingers. They had just brought the roasted chicken and creamy mushroom soup I had ordered in advance. I handed my parents the menu and asked them to choose a few more dishes they liked. But as always, they waved it off. "That's enough," they said. "We'll never finish more. No need to waste anything." I tried to assure them that money was no longer an issue, but they refused to order anything else, no matter how much I pressed. They remained as modest and frugal as ever. In that moment, I realized that true comfort and happiness often come in the quiet simplicity of a shared meal. Dinner lasted almost an hour and a half. The restaurant lights were warm and inviting, casting a soft glow on our table as the sky outside gently darkened. I got up to go to the restroom before that lingering feeling I'd had all afternoon, the feeling of being watched, now had a name and a face. It had been her all along. Alana and Dawson had only been married for a few months, yet both had already quit their jobs. They were obsessed with get-rich-quick schemes. A few years ago, Alana had made some money selling insurance, but she hated the monotony of the job and eventually gave up all stability. Dawson was even worse. He had a gambling problem. As soon as he got his hands on money, he'd end up at a poker table and lose every cent without a second thought. Alana had recently become pregnant, only 2 months along, but between their chaotic lifestyle and unhealthy habits, the pregnancy didn't last. "You know your mother was incredibly biased, right?" I heard her hiss venomously, seething with resentment. "You're her son, and she only left you this old shack. But she gave the money to that stranger. Archer is probably dead somewhere, and if Kylie remarries, the money will just disappear. She'll leave it to some stranger. You have to find a way to get the money back. Maybe use Sawyer, if you know what I mean," she urged in a shrill, demanding voice. "You're crazy," Dawson replied. "That's my nephew. We can't do anything to him." "Then are you just going to watch Kylie spend all your mother's money?" There was a pause. Then Dawson said, "Okay, keep an eye on the street. I'll stay inside, near them. Don't miss an opportunity." By now, my palms were sweaty. I pulled out my phone and quietly pressed record, capturing every word. Then I turned and hurried back to the table. "Mom, Dad," I said softly. "Why don't you head home a little early?
I'll call you right.
Sawyer and I still have something to do." I kept my tone calm, trying not to let the adrenaline show. As soon as I had seen my parents off, I went outside, found a quiet corner, and called the police. I took Sawyer's hand as we left the restaurant and walked through a dark alley that led to a side street. It was a quieter way to the nearest police station. The area was almost deserted, but near the exit, there was a small shop run by an old friend we'd known for years. If something went wrong, I hoped he could help. The streetlights behind us grew dimmer the deeper we went into the alley. I pulled Sawyer closer and quickened my steps, but the unease in my chest wouldn't subside. Every step felt like I was walking on thin ice. "Mom, it's so dark. Are we lost?" Sawyer whispered, his voice full of worry. "Quiet, darling, the exit is right there." "We're almost there," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. That's when I saw a movement out of the corner of my eye. Dawson stood at the end of the alley, pretending to tie his shoelaces. But it was too obvious. I knew instantly that he had been waiting for us. I stopped dead in my tracks, instinctively shielding Sawyer. Moments later, Alana appeared from the other side, creeping closer with a cold glint in her eyes. "Kylie," she said mockingly, "leaving so soon? We weren't done talking." I forced myself to maintain composure, ignoring the pounding in my heart. "What do you want if it's about money?" I said. Dawson interjected, "Since you asked, we want the money. The money you took from the old house." "You're crazy," I snarled. "Do you know that money was left to me? It didn't belong to you." Alana let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, please. You decided to care for her. That doesn't mean you get everything." I wanted to leave, clutching my phone tightly. "I've already called the police." Dawson hesitated for a moment, his confidence shaken. "Don't try to scare us." "I'm not bluffing," I said calmly. "Do you think I'd walk into a dark alley with my son without being prepared? I called the police as soon as I left the restaurant. They're probably on their way now. The only thing you can decide is how much trouble you want to get into." The air grew heavy with tension. Alana hissed softly, "Dawson, she's lying. The police don't come that fast." But Dawson no longer looked so sure. He looked around, frowned, and gripped his phone tighter. Just then, the bell above the shop door jingled. Someone had entered. Rhett, the owner, poked his head out from behind the counter and saw us immediately. I raised my hand in a small gesture, enough to get his attention. Dawson noticed it too. I saw a hint of panic in his face. "Stop bluffing, Kylie," Alana said softly. I leaned forward slightly and pressed harder. "What you've already done is bad enough, but if you take another step, it's kidnapping. You still have a way out. But if you cross that line, you're criminals." Beads of sweat stood on Dawson's forehead. His hand trembled slightly as he held the phone. Then Rhett stepped out of the shop and looked over at us. "Everything okay over there?" he called out. "Yes," I replied quickly.
Rhett, could you do MLA favor and call the police again?
"We're being followed." That was it. I watched the color drain from Alana's face. She really called someone. She hissed, grabbing Dawson's arm. "Come on." But Dawson didn't move immediately. They hadn't physically assaulted us, but the intimidation and pursuit were enough. The police took it seriously, launched an investigation, and began the process of subpoenaing both of them. "We'll file a report," one of the officers told me. "I strongly recommend applying for a restraining order." I nodded. "All I want is for them to stay away from me and my son." Sawyer stood by my side the whole time, clutching my hand tightly with his small one. He hadn't said a word, but I could feel a slight tremble in his fingers. I squeezed his hand gently. "It's okay, darling. Mom is here." That night, Sawyer fell asleep in my arms. I stroked his hair, listening to his soft, even breathing. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace, and that's when I truly understood. This house no longer needs someone to hold it together. Now, I am the foundation of this family. Early the next morning, I opened the window and heard whispers from the other side of the yard.
Did you hear? Alana and Dawson got into big trouble last night.
Really? The police were there and everything. Dawson's been in gambling debt for years. It was inevitable. Poor Kylie. She took care of the old woman for 10 years, and now she has to deal with this mess. She's better off than those two now. With the money the old woman left her, she wouldn't have to work another day if she didn't want to. I didn't go out. I didn't answer. I just stood at the window, listening as their voices faded in the distance. This town was small, so small that every ripple became a flood by the time it reached the last corner. I didn't have to explain anything. I didn't have to say a word. Sooner or later, everyone would know the truth. Dawson and Alana had become the laughingstock of the town and, at the same time, faced the biggest disaster of their lives. People here had always complained about Dawson's gambling addiction, but now that everything had come to light, the sharks began to circle him. His creditors tightened the noose. He used to manage to trick at the poker table, but now no one gave him credit, not even the casinos. For Alana, things were even worse. She had sold insurance, she was good at talking, but never closing a deal. Her numbers were dismal, and now that the news had spread, the few leads she had disappeared. Some neighbors even openly mocked her. Selling insurance with your reputation? She exploded, posting a dramatic, tearful video online, sobbing about how poverty had left her no choice but to try and claim what was rightfully hers. A desperate plea for pity. But the comment section was icy. Being broke doesn't give you the right to act like a thief. If you're poor, get a job, not other people's money. It was your sister-in-law who cared for that woman for 10 years, not you. Where do you get the nerve? Her account was soon reported and suspended by the platform for violating content guidelines. Meanwhile, Amaya had remained quiet for most of the chaos. But as Dawson and Alana became the town's favorite scandal, she finally caved and called me. Her voice carried its usual arrogance. Kylie, what on earth have you told everyone? I raised an eyebrow. I haven't told anyone anything. Everyone figures it out on their own. She snorted. Don't be so smug. Do you think you've won? Do you think you've shut us out forever? Amaya, I said with a calm I'd never possessed before. I stopped caring what you thought of me a long time ago. I used to have a little hope, thought maybe we could still be family. But now I see it clearly. To you, I was just unpaid help. Want to fight over houses? Go ahead. Want to yell, argue, burn bridges? Be my guest. But from now on, don't come to me. With that, I hung up. 3 days later, a gray suitcase arrived at the Maple Creek train station. Archer had returned. He wore a crumpled raincoat, his face etched with the lines of time and exhaustion around his eyes. But the cold indifference, the selfishness that had always defined him, hadn't faded one bit. He paused briefly on the platform, pulling out his phone to reread Amaya's email. She's at the top now. They say she inherited all of Mom's money. Cash, properties, maybe more. Are you really going to let her get everything? Amaya's message was carefully worded, but every line struck Archer's deepest insecurities. At the end of the email was a photo. Kylie and Sawyer, bathed in soft sunlight. A moment of peace between mother and son. But Archer saw neither warmth nor family. What he saw was something entirely different. She had it too good, and that comfort, that serenity, he didn't believe she deserved. His eyes narrowed, and a spark of greed flickered beneath the surface. That night, Amaya met him at a local cafe in town. So, you really came back, she said, scrutinizing him from across the table. I thought you'd never set foot in this place again. Didn't think so either, Archer replied, leaning back in his chair. But your message made me rethink some things. Amaya let out a short, dry laugh. Rethink, or you just smelled an opportunity? Archer didn't bother to deny it. He had never hidden his motives, especially when money was involved. You're right, he said seriously. I won't let her get everything. This money belonged to Mom. It belongs to this family. Amaya snorted. Save the noble speech. Where were you all these years? Kylie took care of your mother for a decade, and you disappeared. I had no obligation to stay, he said with a harder tone. I left because I knew this place had nothing to offer. Kylie chose to stay. That doesn't give her the right to take everything. But you know she has a legal claim to this inheritance, Amaya said softly. That's why I'm not going the legal route, Archer said with a quiet, cutting voice. I'll attack her emotional weak spot. Amaya frowned. Do you really think she has any emotions left? She's cold as ice now.
She's shoot us all out.
Then I'll use Sawyer. Amaya's expression changed. You're crazy.
Don't forget.
You disappeared right after he was born. You never had a relationship with him. I don't need a real relationship, Archer said with a slow, bitter smile. I just need her to believe I feel a little remorse, a hint of paternal guilt. That's all it takes to break her. Amaya stared at him for a long time, then shook her head with a hollow laugh. You haven't changed a bit. Talking about family, about justice, when the only thing you care about is money. And you're any different? He countered. The air between them grew still. After a few seconds, Amaya said softly, then we'll have to plan this carefully. We can't push her too hard. She's not the woman she used to be. I know, Archer replied, standing up. That's why I need you to open the door first. You're still family to her. You can get closer to her than I can. When do you plan to show up? The sooner the better, he said with a cold smile. While she's still basking in her little dream of freedom, I want to give her a good dose of reality. That day, I was just coming back from the neighborhood grocery store. A bag with bread and milk swung gently in my hand, the sun was shining, and the first spring flowers bloomed on both sides of the street. I turned the corner. The man who had disappeared without a trace from our lives a decade ago was suddenly standing before me. And yet, my first reaction wasn't anger or tears, but a deep, stinging sense of unfamiliarity. He spoke first, in a rough but unmistakably familiar voice, Kylie. I instinctively recoiled, stunned. Archer, is that really you? Even as the words left my mouth, I forced myself to maintain composure, but the coldness in my tone surprised even me. What are you doing here? I asked bluntly. He smiled, as if he had rehearsed this moment. I just wanted to see how things were going. No, I replied simply, picked up the bag, and walked past him. My back felt stiff as stone, and I didn't dare to look back. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him standing there. He didn't follow me. He didn't say another word. I didn't turn around. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't dare. That night, I stood in the kitchen, cutting potatoes, but my mind kept replaying his face. He had more gray hair, deeper wrinkles around his eyes, but that familiar, empty indifference hadn't changed. It transported me right back to a life I thought I had long buried. Sawyer sat in the living room, working on a puzzle, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. And then I realized, he didn't even remember what his father looked like. 10 years. Archer had been gone for 10 years, and I had weathered all the storms. Caring for his mother, raising a child alone, enduring every silent adversity. His sudden reappearance wasn't just an intrusion, it was like a slow, precise torture. 2 days later, Archer appeared at my door. I didn't let him in. He stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, trying to look like an old friend asking for forgiveness. Kylie, I'm not here to cause trouble, he said. I just want to see Sawyer. Maybe we could talk sometime. I stared at him for a long time before speaking. We have nothing left to discuss. I'm not here to demand anything, he quickly said. It's just that the past few years haven't been easy for me either. I want to take responsibility. A bitter laugh escaped me. Now you remember you're a father. I know I messed up, he said softly, but I genuinely want to fix things. I didn't move, keeping my voice steady. What you claim to admit isn't what our son needs. And whatever brought you back, I'll find out soon enough. Archer didn't come back in the following days, but I knew he was still in town. I saw him buying groceries, sitting quietly in the town square, even lurking near the school path when Sawyer came home from school. "Mom," Sawyer said one afternoon when he came home. "A man stopped me today and said he was my dad." The clothes hangers I was holding slipped easily from my hand, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. "What did you say?" I asked, calming my voice. "I said I don't remember him." "He said I look a lot like him," Sawyer said, shrugging, "but I don't think so." And his smile was kind of weird. I knelt beside him and gently took his hand. "Darling, if you ever see him again, it's okay to be polite, but you don't have to say much." "Okay." Sawyer nodded, though I could see the questions already forming in his eyes. That night, the phone rang. It was Amaya. "So, have you seen Archer?" Her tone was casual, as if asking about a neighbor who had moved. "Did you know he was coming back?" My voice instantly grew colder. "No," she said after a pause. Then she added, as if it had just occurred to her, "He just wanted to see his son. He's not a bad person." "Amaya," I said softly, lowering my voice. "Save the theatrics. He disappeared for 10 years, without a letter, without a call. And now he just happens to reappear. Do you really expect me to believe this is some kind of family reunion?" "Kylie, it's not so black and white. He's still Sawyer's father, isn't he?" I didn't answer, but a suspicion began to form in my mind, growing clearer and stronger. Archer hadn't returned on a whim. He had been gone for a whole decade, as if swallowed by the earth. And now, shortly after his mother had died and I had inherited money, his sudden reappearance was no coincidence. If his true motive was the money, I had to be prepared before he made his next move. And more than ever, I was sure he hadn't come back alone. He and Amaya were probably in cahoots from the start, planning together. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes. I took a deep breath. Archer was back, but this time, I wouldn't be the naive one who blindly followed others. I was no longer the Kylie of 10 years ago. Lately, Amaya had been showing up in my life more and more often, so much so that it was impossible to ignore her. She no longer spoke with that condescending tone from before, was no longer biting or arrogant. Instead, she had suddenly become considerate. She brought over baked goods, invited me for tea, even offered to help me clean out old things in the house. "You have your hands full, raising Sawyer and organizing the move," she said with a friendly smile. "I just wanted to help you. After all, we're family." But I knew it wasn't true. This sudden warmth wasn't kindness, but a strategy. Amaya wasn't the type to soften without reason. Every nice gesture, every casual offer of help, was a subtle test, a needle probing my defenses. That afternoon, we sat in the living room of the old house. I was dusting a shelf when she casually asked, "What are you going to do with this place?" "The market is pretty good right now. You could make a decent profit if you sell it." "I haven't decided yet," I replied without looking up. She tried again, still in a light tone. "If you're really attached to it, you could always keep it for Sawyer. It was his grandmother's house, after all. Maybe someday when he's older, he'll want to come back." I didn't answer, just gave her a slight smile. When she realized I didn't bite, she changed the subject. "By the way, Archer keeps telling me how much you've changed lately." I looked up. "Of course, I've changed."
Amaya laughed softly.
"He didn't mean it badly, just that you've become very strong. You manage everything on your own. Maybe it wouldn't be bad if someone else shared the burden with you now and then." She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The implication was crystal clear, and in that moment, I understood exactly why she had grown so close to me. She was laying the groundwork, slowly trying to push her way back into my life, waiting for the right moment to strike. That night, I sat alone on the balcony for a long time. I thought about the girl I had been 10 years ago, the young bride who had entered this house full of hope, ready to give everything just to feel like she belonged. But now, this house was no longer my home. This man was no longer my husband. He hadn't returned out of love or remorse. He would come back for the money. This bitter truth didn't surprise me, but somehow it still left a cold ache in my chest. The next day, I took Sawyer to the town library. We sat in the reading room, and he quietly leafed through a picture book about galaxies and space. I watched him from the shelf, noticing the calm, concentrated look on his small face. "Mom," he said suddenly, turning to me, "do you think that man really wants to spend time with me?" I paused, surprised. "He keeps asking me what I like, what I want," Sawyer said seriously. "But he never asks how my day was." My eyes burned. "Darling, do you like him?" I asked gently. He shook his head and turned back to his book. In that moment, I understood, even if he was young, he could feel it. He could discern who truly loved him and who didn't. Still that afternoon, back at home, I pulled out the documents Marie had left me. Inheritance documents, bank records, trust fund proposals, financial planning notes. I went through every detail and secured everything. This money had to be protected, not just for me, but for Sawyer. I arranged a meeting with my lawyer. It was time to update all my financial documents. I wanted to set up a trust fund exclusively for Sawyer, naming him as the sole beneficiary. I added an explicit clause legally preventing third parties, including his father, from accessing or influencing the account in any way. I wouldn't wait for Archer to make his move. I had already made mine. Until everything came to light, I didn't intend to confront them directly. I would continue to live, continue to smile, even enjoy Amaya's friendliness and Archer's remorse. What they didn't know was that I was no longer following their script. Every move they made, I was already 3 steps ahead. I would wait patiently until their masks finally fell. The late spring breeze began to bring an unsettling warmth, and I could feel Archer growing more impatient by the day. For weeks, he maintained his facade, controlled, polite, even helpful. When he showed up on Sawyer's school route, he occasionally brought me a coffee, playing the role of the well-meaning ex. At community events, he was charming, as if he genuinely wanted to be a part of his son's life. But I knew better. It was all an act. He was waiting for me to drop my guard, to let him in, to finally open the door to that money. What he didn't know was that the door was already sealed. That day, I received a call from the bank. "Hello, Miss Kylie Jones. We received an inquiry from Mr. Archer Jones, claiming to be the legal guardian of Sawyer Jones. He is requesting access to the trust fund data and has submitted a withdrawal request." My knuckles went white around the phone. "No one is authorized to access that account," I said calmly. "The fund was established with me as the sole trustee, and there is a clause explicitly excluding his father from any financial authority." There was a brief pause before the voice on the other end replied, now firm and formal. "Understood. We have reviewed the documents. Everything is in order. Don't worry. You are in control." I hung up, not with satisfaction, but with a firm sense of determination. Archer had finally made his move. Less than 30 minutes later, my lawyer sent me a copy of the official rejection letter from the bank. It described the terms of the fund in clear, precise language, addressed directly to Archer, the applicant. "In accordance with the wishes of the trust fund's founder and the contractual terms, you have no authority over this fund. Please do not submit any further invalid requests." I could almost imagine Archer's expression as he read it. He had calculated everything, except for the fact that I was no longer the woman he could manipulate. The next day, Amaya appeared at my door. As soon as she entered, she got straight to the point. "You expected all this, didn't you?" I didn't answer, just placed a glass of water on the table. She gritted her teeth. "You're cruel. You were the ones who thought this would be easy." She slammed the door behind her, leaving a trail of bitterness and frustration in the air. A few days later, I saw Archer outside the grocery store. He seemed to have aged 10 years, his face gaunt, his gaze clouded with exhaustion and defeat. The man who had once stormed out of our house with his head held high and overflowing confidence now looked like a worn-out shadow of his former self. He saw me and hesitantly took a step forward. Then he stopped, uncertain. I stood still, watching him calmly. "You won, Kylie," he said softly, his voice hoarse and a lump in his throat as he spoke the words. I replied calmly, "You were simply too greedy. This was never a competition. You just never understood that some things cannot be achieved with force or manipulation." He lowered his gaze to the ground. It took him a moment to respond. I thought maybe I could still hold onto something. You once had a whole family, I said softly. You're the one who left. If you have nothing now, it's because you chose it. Archer didn't object. He didn't beg or plead. He had run out of fight. He stayed in town for a few more days, then quietly packed his bags and left without a big farewell scene, without drama. He simply disappeared. Just like all those years ago. Amaya never reappeared. Those who had worked so hard to tear my life apart were finally gone for good. A few days later, I began to get involved in community activities. For so many years, I had managed everything alone, silently, invisibly, with my head bowed. But now I stepped forward, not to please anyone, but because I had finally realized that I had every right to choose the life I wanted. The local public library was looking for volunteers, and I signed up. The neighborhood association needed help organizing events, and I helped set up tables and hang decorations. The Children's Art Center asked for parent support, and I became one of the regular helpers. You're always so caring, Myla, one of the organizers, said affectionately. Everything runs smoother with you. I smiled slightly. Perhaps I'm just used to taking care of people. But what Myla didn't see was that my smile was lighter this time than it had been in years. Sawyer also began to adapt to this new chapter. His emotions had calmed. He seemed more composed, more open. Every afternoon after school, he came home, bubbling with stories about who said what in class, what games they played at recess. Last week, he brought home a certificate for an excellent grade on a math test. I proudly hung it on the refrigerator door and caught myself looking at it every time I passed by. A place where women like me, overwhelmed and forgotten, could find advice, support, and perhaps just someone to listen. It wasn't just about making money. It was about offering something I had desperately needed myself. I contacted an old friend who now worked in family services and led a community program focused on rebuilding broken family relationships. Do you really want to do this? She asked, a bit surprised. I want to try, I said, nodding. There was a time when I wished someone would help me out of the darkness. Now I want to be that hand for someone else. She reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. You've changed, Kylie. You've become stronger, better. I said nothing, just smiled. Time passed quietly, as if nothing had happened. And yet, as if everything had changed. The trees on the street had begun to sprout new, tender leaves. Sunlight streamed across the windowsill, and the air carried the gentle scent of early summer. In the kitchen, I prepared a cup of black tea. The house was still, filled only with the soft hiss of the boiling kettle. Sawyer sat at his desk, writing. Sunlight grazed his shoulders, casting a golden glow on his notebook. He scribbled with great concentration, occasionally tilting his head to think before continuing. He had grown. His features slowly shed the softness of childhood, becoming sharper, calmer, more defined. This was my life now. Simple, quiet, free from unnecessary people and unnecessary emotions. That afternoon, Sawyer and I took a walk through the community garden. He held my hand tightly, chattering non-stop about the new art class at school, telling me how he had painted a huge tree with a small paper bird's nest cut out. Mom, did you like to paint when you were a kid? Yes, I said with a smile, but I wasn't very good at it. I bet your drawings were much better than mine, he said seriously. I knelt down and hugged him. But your tree is the best I've ever seen. He laughed lightly and clearly, pulling me forward as we continued walking. Sunlight filtered through the branches, scattering in soft, flickering patterns on the path. My steps were firm, deliberate, like life itself now. I was no longer in a hurry. I was no longer lost. That night, we cooked together. He washed the vegetables while I stood at the stove. On the table lay his drawing of the big tree, which I had attached to the refrigerator with a magnet. When you're big, this drawing will still be here, I said. It will remind me that once there was a boy in this kitchen who washed vegetables, laughed, and told stories. His eyes lit up, and then he said, Mom, when I grow up, I'll protect you, just like you protect me now. My heart clenched for a moment. My hands paused over the pan. Then I smiled and nodded. Agreed. We have a promise. Late at night, the house lay in gentle silence. I sat alone on the balcony, my teacup in hand, long since cold. The streetlights glowed softly in the distance, and now and then a night bird croaked in the darkness. I closed my eyes and thought of every step I had taken to get here. The pain, the struggle, the days of loneliness I had endured were now just like waves on the water's surface, slowly smoothed by the passage of time. I no longer needed anyone's validation. I no longer needed anyone's apology. I had learned to hide the pain in the quiet corners of my memory and yet continue to move forward, to live. From inside, I heard Sawyer's soft, even breathing, the most comforting sound in the world. And in a quiet whisper just for myself I said, I am home, truly home in my own life. The night breeze lifted the curtains. I slowly stood up and closed the window. Behind me lay a house that finally belonged entirely to me.